A Werewolf Shifter Romance written by Amelia Hart, Chapter 1. The Cursed Offering. The morning mist clung to the stone walls of Castle Greymont like a shroud, and Isadora pressed her face against the cold window glass, watching servants scurry across the courtyard below. At 22, she had grown accustomed to observing life from behind barriers. Windows, veils, shadows. Today, however, felt different. The very air seemed to thrum with anticipation, though whether of doom or deliverance, she couldn't say. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside her chamber. Isadora's hand instinctively rose to adjust the thick veil that covered the left side of her face, where twisted scars ran from temple to jaw like gnarled tree roots. The marking had been there since infancy, a cruel gift that had shaped every moment of her existence. Isadora. Her father's voice carried through the oak door, cold as winter stone. Present yourself in the great hall immediately. She knew that tone. It meant decisions had been made about her future, decisions in which her opinion held no weight. Rising from her window seat, Isadora smoothed her dark burgundy gown and checked her veil once more. The fabric was fine enough to see through from her side, but thick enough to obscure the worst of her disfigurement from others. The great hall of Castle Greymont stretched before her like a cavern, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadow. Banners bearing the family crest, a silver wolf beneath 3 stars, hung motionless in the still air. Her father, Lord Edmund Greymont, stood beside the massive stone hearth, his weathered face grave. Beside him waited her stepmother, Lady Vivian, whose beauty had always served as an unspoken rebuke to Isadora's cursed appearance. "Daughter," Lord Edmund began without preamble, "you are to be wed." The words hit her like a physical blow, though she managed to keep her expression neutral. "To whom, father?" "King Roderick Ironhold of the Northern Territories." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of logs in the fireplace. Isadora felt the blood drain from her face. Every person in the kingdom knew that name. The Alpha King who had never lost a battle, whose very presence could make grown warriors flee. Stories spoke of his supernatural strength, his ability to shift into a wolf larger than a destrier, his cold golden eyes that could freeze a man's soul. "The Alpha King," she whispered, disbelief coloring her voice. "But father, surely he would never accept a bride such as you?" Lady Vivian's voice carried cruel amusement. "Oh, my dear, that's precisely why this arrangement is so perfect." Lord Edmund shot his wife a warning glance before continuing. "The king has demanded tribute from all the southern kingdoms. Gold, grain, warriors, or a bride from noble blood. This alliance will spare our people from his wrath." "You mean to insult him," Isadora said quietly, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. "You're offering him a bride you consider worthless." Her father's jaw tightened. "You will serve your family's needs, as is your duty. The marriage will take place in 1 fortnight. Prepare yourself." As her parents departed, their whispered conversation drifted back to her. "Are you certain this will work?" Lady Vivian asked. "The Alpha King's pride is legendary," her father replied. "When he sees what we've sent him as a bride, he'll consider it an insult grave enough to justify breaking the alliance. Then we'll be free to accept Lord Blackmere's offer of protection instead." Isadora's blood turned to ice. Lord Blackmere, the neighboring ruler known for his cruelty and dark practices. The man her father truly wanted as an ally, regardless of the cost to their people. That evening, alone in her chamber, Isadora sat before her mirror and carefully removed her veil. The reflection that stared back was familiar, yet heartbreaking. One side of her face remained untouched by whatever had marked her as an infant, showing delicate features and large brown eyes. But the left side told a different story, with raised scars that twisted from her temple down to her jaw, pulling slightly at the corner of her mouth. She had never questioned the story her family told, that she had been burned in a fire as a baby, too young to remember. The servants whispered different tales, though. They spoke of curses and dark magic, of a child marked by forces beyond mortal understanding. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "My lady?" The voice belonged to Martha, her elderly maid, and the closest thing to a mother she had ever known. "Come in, Martha." The woman entered carrying a tea tray, her kind face creased with worry. "I heard about the betrothal, child. Are you all right?" Isadora managed a bitter smile. as well as can be expected, considering I'm to be sacrificed to save the kingdom's pride. Martha set down the tray and moved to stand behind Isadora's chair, their eyes meeting in the mirror. There are things about your birth that you don't know, child. Things your father forbade me to speak of. What things? The older woman hesitated, glancing toward the door. The night you were born, a terrible storm raged. The midwife said she'd never seen anything like it. Lightning struck the castle 7 times, and the wind howled like souls in torment. When you emerged, you bore those marks already. You mean I wasn't burned in a fire? No fire touched you, child. But there was a woman who came that night, a stranger with silver hair and eyes like winter frost. She spoke to your father privately, and after she left, he declared that your marks were the result of an accident. But I heard her words before she departed. Isadora turned in her chair to face Martha directly. What did she say? She said you were marked by destiny itself, that the scars would serve a purpose when the time came. She said you would know great love and great power, but only after you learned to see beyond the surface of things. The words sent a strange chill through Isadora's body. Do you believe her? Martha's weathered hand touched Isadora's cheek gently, encompassing both the scarred and unmarked sides. I believe you're far more than anyone in this castle realizes, including yourself. And perhaps this marriage, frightening as it seems, is the beginning of your true story. Later that night, unable to sleep, Isadora found herself in the castle's highest tower, looking out over the moonlit landscape. In the distance, she could see the dark line of the Thornwood Forest, beyond which lay the Northern Territories and her intended husband. What manner of man was this Alpha King? The stories painted him as a monster, but Martha's words had planted a seed of curiosity in her mind. If she truly was marked by destiny, perhaps there was more to this arrangement than her family's political machinations. A movement in the courtyard below caught her attention. 2 figures stood in deep conversation near the stables. Her father and a man she didn't recognize, cloaked in shadow. Their postures suggested secrecy, and something about the stranger's presence made her skin prickle with unease. She leaned forward, straining to hear their words on the night air. The poison will be undetectable, the stranger was saying. 1 drop in his wine on the wedding night, and the Northern Territories will be without their king. Then Lord Blackmere can move in to claim the throne. Her father's voice carried clearly in the stillness. And my daughter? Will be blamed for his death, naturally. A convenient scapegoat, and one whose loss will hardly be mourned. Isadora's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. They weren't just using her as an insult. They planned to make her an unwitting assassin, then sacrifice her life to cover their treachery. The stranger continued. The marriage ceremony will proceed as planned. Once the deed is done, and suspicion falls on her, Lord Blackmere will arrive as our savior, offering protection from the king's vengeful forces. The people will welcome him as a hero. And if she refuses to go through with the marriage, then we'll find other means to eliminate the Alpha King. But this way is cleaner. It removes 2 obstacles at once. Isadora pressed herself against the stone wall, her mind racing. She had been prepared to accept her fate as an unwanted bride, even to face the Alpha King's wrath when he saw her scarred face. But she couldn't be party to murder, especially not of an innocent man who had done nothing more than demand tribute that was rightfully his. The 2 men parted ways, her father returning to the castle while the stranger melted back into the shadows. Isadora remained in the tower for a long time, weighing her limited options. She could warn her father's intended victim, but who would believe the word of a scarred, rejected daughter against a lord's sworn oath? She could refuse to marry, but that would only force them to find another method of assassination, one that might involve innocent bystanders. Or she could run, leave behind everything she had ever known and disappear into the night, hoping to reach the Alpha King before the wedding and somehow convince him of the danger he faced. The idea terrified her. She had never left the castle grounds alone, never faced the world without the protection of walls and servants. But the alternative was to become a murderer by proxy, and that was a fate she couldn't accept. As dawn approached, Isadora made her choice. She would flee Greymont Castle, not to escape her destiny, but to embrace it. If she truly was marked by forces beyond mortal understanding, then perhaps this was the moment those marks would finally serve their purpose. She had 3 days before the wedding party was scheduled to depart for the Northern Territories. 3 days to gather supplies, plan her route, and summon the courage to face the unknown. For the first time in her 22 years, Isadora felt something she had never experienced before, a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with her family's expectations or society's rejection. She was going to save the Alpha King's life, even if it cost her own. The scarred bride would become something more than anyone had ever imagined. Chapter 2. Forest of Fates. The Thornwood Forest stretched endlessly before Isadora, its ancient trees forming a canopy so thick that midday felt like twilight. Rain had been falling steadily since dawn, turning the forest path into a treacherous ribbon of mud and fallen leaves. Her stolen horse had thrown a shoe 2 hours ago, forcing her to continue on foot through terrain that grew more hostile with each step. 3 days had passed since she fled Greymont Castle in the dead of night, taking only what she could carry, a leather satchel with bread and dried meat, her mother's silver dagger, and the plain brown cloak that now served as her only protection against the elements. She had abandoned her noble gowns and veils, choosing instead the rough-spun dress of a servant. The disguise felt strangely liberating, as if she could shed her cursed identity along with her fine clothes. The forest seemed to whisper with hidden dangers. Every rustling branch could conceal bandits, every shadow might hide wild beasts. But Isadora pressed forward, driven by the knowledge that Alpha King Roderick's life hung in the balance. According to the wedding plans she had overheard, he would depart his stronghold tomorrow to meet the bridal party at the neutral ground of Millbrook Abbey. She had to reach him first. A branch snapped somewhere behind her, and Isadora spun around, her hand instinctively moving to the dagger at her waist. The sound came again, deliberate footsteps splashing through puddles. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she realized she was being followed. Well, a rough voice called from the gloom. What have we here? A little dove, lost in the woods? 3 men emerged from behind the massive oak trees, their faces bearing the hard lines of those who lived outside the law. The leader, a scarred man with greasy black hair, grinned to reveal several missing teeth. His companions flanked him with practiced ease, cutting off any possibility of escape. Please, Isadora said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I have nothing of value. Just let me pass. The leader laughed, a sound like grinding stones. Oh, but you're wrong about that, sweet dove. A young woman alone in these woods? You're worth plenty to the right buyer. One of his companions, a thin man with a nervous twitch, stepped closer. Look at her hood, Garth. She's hiding something underneath, probably scarred from the pox. Won't fetch much at market. Even pox-marked wenches have their uses, Garth replied, drawing a rusty blade. Strip off that hood. Let's see what we're working with. Isadora backed against a tree trunk, her fingers closing around her dagger's hilt. She had never used it as anything more than a dining knife, but desperation made her bold. Stay back. I'm warning you. The bandits burst into laughter at her threat, but their mirth died abruptly as the sound of hoofbeats thundered through the forest. The earth seemed to shake beneath the approaching riders, and even the raindrops appeared to hang suspended in the suddenly charged air. What in the 7 hells? Garth began, but his words were cut off as a massive destrier burst through the underbrush, its rider seeming to merge with the shadows and mist. Isadora's breath caught in her throat. The man who sat astride the black warhorse was larger than any mortal had a right to be, his presence filling the forest clearing like a storm front. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, framing a face that could have been carved from granite, all sharp angles and unforgiving lines. But it was his eyes that made her soul recognize him instantly, golden orbs that seemed to burn with their own inner fire. Alpha King Roderick Ironhold had found her first. You gentlemen seem to be troubling this lady, he said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made mountains bow. Behind him, 4 more riders materialized from the forest depths, their armor bearing the wolf's head sigil of the Northern Territories. Garth raised his blade with shaking hands. This is our prize, Your Majesty. We found her first. Did you? The Alpha King dismounted with fluid grace, his boots making no sound as they touched the forest floor. He moved like a predator, economical, deadly, absolutely certain of his supremacy. And what precisely makes you think you can claim anything in my presence? The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Isadora pressed herself harder against the tree trunk, torn between terror and fascination as she watched the scene unfold. This was the man her father planned to murder, the warrior whose death would plunge the kingdoms into chaos. One of the bandits, the nervous one, broke first. "We meant no disrespect, King Roderick. We'll just be on our way." He never finished the sentence. The Alpha King moved faster than human sight could follow, his hand closing around the bandit's throat. There was no visible effort, no strain, just the inexorable power of a force of nature. The man's feet left the ground entirely. "When I ask a question," Roderick said conversationally, "I expect an answer. What makes you think you can threaten an innocent woman in my forest?" "Your forest?" Garth snarled, though his voice shook. "These are the Thornwood Wilds. No king's law runs here. My law runs wherever I choose to enforce it." The Alpha King released his grip, letting the gasping bandit collapse to the muddy ground. "And I choose to enforce it now." What followed was less a battle than a demonstration of absolute supremacy. The Alpha King moved through the bandits like a scythe through wheat, his bare hands more deadly than their rusted weapons. Within moments, all three lay unconscious in the mud, breathing but thoroughly defeated. Throughout the entire encounter, Isadora remained frozen against her tree, unable to process what she was witnessing. The stories had not prepared her for the reality of Alpha King Roderick, the way he commanded not just the loyalty of his men, but the very elements around him. The rain seemed to avoid his face, and the shadows bent to accommodate his passage. When he finally turned his attention to her, those burning golden eyes focused with uncomfortable intensity. "Are you harmed?" The question was simple, but something in his tone made her skin prickle with awareness. She managed to shake her head, not trusting her voice. "Good." He gestured to one of his men. "Marcus, see that these fools find their way to the nearest gibbet. They'll live, but they won't be troubling anyone else soon." As his soldiers dealt with the unconscious bandits, the Alpha King approached Isadora with measured steps. This close, she could see the intricate embroidery on his black leather coat, smell the scent of pine and steel that clung to him like morning mist. "What brings a young woman alone into the Thornwood?" he asked. "These paths are dangerous even for armed men." Isadora's mind raced. She couldn't reveal her identity. Not yet. Not until she found a way to convince him of the danger he faced. But something about his presence made lying feel impossible, as if those golden eyes could see straight through to her soul. "I'm traveling to Millbrook Abbey," she said, which was true enough. The abbey lay along the route to his territorial borders. My family has business there." "Traveling alone and on foot?" His gaze moved to her mud-stained cloak, the practical boots that marked her as no noble lady. "What manner of business requires such haste that you'd risk the forest roads?" Before she could answer, thunder rolled across the sky, and the gentle rain transformed into a torrential downpour. The Alpha King glanced upward with what might have been irritation, then back to her with something that looked almost like concern. "We'll escort you as far as our paths coincide," he decided. "Marcus, bring up a spare horse. The lady will ride with us until we reach safe ground." "That's very kind, but I couldn't impose," Isadora began, but he cut her off with a gesture. "It's not kindness, it's necessity. No one dies in my forest on my watch, regardless of their station or purpose." One of his soldiers approached, leading a gentle bay mare. "Your Majesty, perhaps the lady would prefer to ride behind one of us. The spare mount is spirited." "I can manage a horse," Isadora said quickly, then flushed as she realized how that might sound. "I mean, I've had some experience with riding." The Alpha King's mouth quirked slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. "Have you? That's encouraging. Mount up then. We have ground to cover before nightfall." As they rode through the forest, Isadora found herself stealing glances at the man who would soon be her unwitting husband. He rode with unconscious command, his body moving in perfect harmony with his destrier's powerful gait. When he spoke to his men, they responded with genuine respect rather than mere obedience. This was a leader who had earned his position through more than birthright. "You're staring," he said without looking at her, startling her from her observations. Heat flooded her cheeks. "I apologize, Your Majesty. I've never seen a king before. And what did you expect to see?" The question seemed genuinely curious rather than mocking. Isadora considered her answer carefully. "Someone more distant, I suppose." Cruel, perhaps. The stories make you sound like a monster. Do they? He finally turned to look at her, and she caught something that might have been amusement in those golden depths. And what do you think now? I think, she said slowly, that stories often have very little to do with truth. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats creating a strangely peaceful atmosphere, despite the continuing rain. Isadora found herself relaxing for the first time since leaving Greymont Castle. There was something about the Alpha King's presence that made her feel safe, protected in a way she had never experienced before. It was only when they stopped to rest the horses that disaster struck. A gust of wind caught Isadora's hood, pulling it back from her face before she could react. She heard one of the soldiers gasp, saw others avert their eyes in uncomfortable embarrassment. But it was the Alpha King's reaction that made her world tilt on its axis. He went absolutely still, those golden eyes locked onto her scarred face with an intensity that made her want to disappear entirely. For a long moment, the only sounds were the pattering rain and the soft snorting of horses. Then, impossibly, he smiled. Not the polite expression of a king being courteous to a disfigured peasant. Not pity or revulsion, or carefully controlled disgust. A genuine smile that transformed his stern features and made her heart skip several beats in succession. Now that, he said softly, is very interesting indeed. Chapter 3. The Mark of Destiny. The abandoned huntsman's lodge appeared through the rain like a gift from the gods themselves. Its stone walls and slate roof had weathered countless storms, and though moss crept up its sides and ivy claimed the shutters, the structure remained sound. Alpha King Roderick guided his destrier toward the modest building, his golden eyes never leaving Isadora's face since her hood had fallen away. "We'll shelter here until the storm passes," he announced to his men, though his gaze remained fixed on her with unsettling intensity. "Marcus, see to the horses. The rest of you, establish a perimeter. I want to know if so much as a rabbit approaches this place." His soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, leaving Isadora alone with the most powerful man in the northern kingdoms. The weight of his attention made her skin prickle with awareness. Not fear exactly, but something far more complex and dangerous. "Your Majesty," she began, pulling her hood back up with trembling fingers. "I should continue on my way. The Abbey isn't far. The Abbey is still 8 miles through terrain that becomes impassable in weather like this," he interrupted, dismounting with fluid grace. "You'd be dead before midnight. And I meant what I said about no one dying in my forest." Thunder crashed overhead as if to emphasize his words, and rain began pelting the earth with renewed fury. Isadora had little choice but to accept his logic, though being alone with him in such close quarters felt like courting disaster of an entirely different sort. The lodge's interior was sparse but clean. Someone, likely his advance scouts, had laid a fire in the stone hearth, and the dancing flames cast warm shadows across rough-hewn wooden walls. A simple table dominated the center of the room, flanked by 2 sturdy chairs. In one corner, a narrow bed was covered with traveling furs that looked far too luxurious for such humble surroundings. "Sit," Roderick commanded, gesturing toward one of the chairs. "You're shivering." Isadora hadn't realized she was, but now that he'd mentioned it, she could feel the tremors running through her body. Whether from cold, exhaustion, or the intensity of his scrutiny, she couldn't say. She sank gratefully into the offered chair, grateful to be off her feet. The Alpha King moved to a leather satchel near the bed, retrieving what appeared to be a silver flask. He uncorked it and poured amber liquid into 2 cups, the rich scent of aged whiskey filling the air. "Drink," he ordered, pressing 1 cup into her hands. "It'll warm you from the inside." The whiskey burned her throat, but he was right. It spread warmth through her chest and limbs almost immediately. She took another sip, then realized he was still staring at her with that same unsettling intensity. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, the whiskey making her bolder than wisdom would suggest. Instead of answering, he moved his chair closer to hers, close enough that she could see the flecks of bronze in his golden eyes, smell the pine and leather scent that seemed to cling to his skin. "Turn your head," he said softly. "Let me see the left side clearly." "Your Majesty, I know I'm hideous." "Turn your head," he repeated, but his voice held no harshness. If anything, it carried an almost gentle command that made refusal impossible. Isadora obeyed, tilting her face so that the scarred side was fully visible in the firelight. She expected to see revulsion, pity, or carefully concealed disgust. Instead, she watched his expression transform into something that looked almost like wonder. Remarkable, he breathed, leaning closer. After all these years, Your Majesty, his fingertips hovered just above her scarred temple, not quite touching but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. There, he whispered, indicating a specific point where the scars formed an unusual pattern. Do you see it? Isadora frowned. See what? The mark. Here, where the scarring forms a crescent shape. His finger traced the air just above her skin, following the curve of raised flesh. It's identical to the mark I saw in my dreams. Your dreams? The words came out breathless, though she couldn't say why. Roderick leaned back, his golden eyes never leaving her face. For 15 years, I've been plagued by the same vision. A woman with dark hair and eyes like forest earth, marked by a crescent scar that catches moonlight like silver. In the dream, she stands at the center of a great battle, her hands glowing with power that turns the tide between light and darkness. Isadora's cup slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering against the wooden floor. That's impossible. Is it? He rose from his chair, beginning to pace before the fire like a caged wolf. The court seers have been trying to interpret that vision for years. They spoke of a marked one who would appear when the kingdom faced its greatest threat. Someone whose scars weren't disfigurement, but destiny made manifest. You're speaking nonsense, she protested, though her voice lacked conviction. I'm nobody. A lord's unwanted daughter with a cursed face. He stopped pacing, turning to face her with sudden intensity. What lord? The question hung in the air like a blade. Isadora realized she had revealed too much, but something about his presence made lies feel impossible. The whiskey, the warmth, the way he looked at her, as if she were precious rather than pitiful. It all conspired to lower her guard. Lord Edmund Greymont, she admitted quietly. Roderick went very still. Greymont, the southern lord who demanded an audience with me regarding a marriage alliance. Yes. The word was barely a whisper. Then you're... His eyes widened as understanding dawned. You're meant to be my bride. Isadora nodded miserably, waiting for his anger, his disgust, his rejection. Instead, she heard something that sounded remarkably like laughter. The irony is exquisite, he said, settling back into his chair. Your father sends me his scarred daughter as an insult, never knowing he's delivered the very woman I've been searching for all my life. Searching for? She echoed weakly. My mate, he said simply, as if stating an obvious fact. My destined partner. The other half of my soul. The words hit her like lightning, sending shockwaves through every nerve in her body. That's... You can't possibly... Can't I? He leaned forward, his presence overwhelming in the small space. Tell me, Isadora. And yes, I know your name. What do you feel when you look at me? The honest answer terrified her. She felt recognition, as if she'd been waiting her entire life for this moment. Safety, despite his fearsome reputation. A pull she couldn't name that made her want to move closer rather than away. I feel... She swallowed hard. I feel like I know you. Like I've always known you. Because you have. His voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Just as I've known you. The dreams, the visions, they weren't prophecy. They were memory. The recognition of a bond that transcends this mortal realm. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury. But inside the lodge, time seemed suspended. Isadora stared into those golden eyes and saw her future written there. Not the future her family had planned, but something far more dangerous and wonderful. There's something else, she said suddenly, remembering why she had fled Greymont Castle. Something you need to know about the wedding. His expression sharpened. What about it? My father. He doesn't intend for the marriage to be consummated. He plans to have you poisoned on our wedding night, then blame me for your death. It's all arranged with Lord Blackmere, who wants to claim your territories. Instead of shock or anger, Roderick's face showed grim satisfaction. I wondered what game Edmund was playing. A scarred bride seemed too obvious an insult, Even for him, you already knew. I suspected treachery. What I didn't expect was that his attempt to deceive me would deliver exactly what I needed most. He reached out, his fingers finally making contact with her scarred cheek. You risked everything to warn me. Why? The touch sent fire through her veins, and she struggled to maintain coherent thought. Because it was right. Because you didn't deserve to die for their ambitions. And because, he said softly, his thumb tracing the edge of her crescent-shaped scar, some part of you recognized the truth even before I explained it. She couldn't deny it. From the moment she'd seen him in the forest, something deep in her soul had whispered that this was where she belonged. Not as a political pawn or an unwanted burden, but as an equal, a partner. What happens now? She asked. Now, Roderick said, his golden eyes burning with promise. We let your father think his plan is proceeding perfectly. We'll return you to the wedding party as if nothing has changed. But when the moment comes for treachery, he'll discover that his scarred offering has become something far more powerful than he ever imagined. And what am I becoming? His smile was fierce and beautiful, transforming his stern features into something that made her heart race. My queen, my partner, the woman who will help me reshape the very foundations of our world. Thunder crashed overhead, and lightning illuminated the lodge windows, casting everything in stark relief. But for Isadora, the storm felt like a celebration rather than a threat. She was no longer the rejected daughter fleeing her fate. She was claiming it. Chapter 4. Masks and Revelations. The great hall of Castle Ironhold stretched before them like a cathedral of stone and shadow. Massive pillars carved with wolves and ancient runes supported a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into darkness, while torches cast dancing light across banners bearing the royal sigil. The very air hummed with power. Not just political authority, but something deeper, more primal. Isadora kept her veil firmly in place as she walked beside Alpha King Roderick, acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes following their progress. They had arrived at his stronghold an hour ago, presenting the carefully constructed story of her rescue from bandits. To all observers, she appeared to be exactly what her father intended. An unwanted bride, grateful for royal protection, but clearly beneath her station. The performance had been Roderick's idea. Let them see what they expect, he had counseled during their journey. A scarred girl, overwhelmed by circumstances beyond her control. They'll dismiss you as irrelevant, which gives us every advantage. Now, surrounded by his court, Isadora marveled at how effortlessly he commanded the room. Nobles and warriors alike bent their heads in respectful acknowledgement as he passed, their deference absolute. Yet she had seen another side of him during their time alone. The man who had traced her scars with gentle fingers, who had spoken of destiny and dreams with wonder rather than duty. Lord Chancellor Aldrich, Roderick addressed a stern-faced man with silver hair. Present the wedding arrangements to Lady Isadora. I want everything prepared according to traditional customs. The Chancellor bowed deeply. Of course, Your Majesty. The ceremony will take place in 3 days, as previously planned. The representatives from Lord Greymont's house should arrive tomorrow with the official documents. Excellent. Roderick's golden eyes found Isadora's through her veil. Lady Isadora will need appropriate chambers, befitting her station as my bride. See that she has everything required. As servants hurried to escort her away, Isadora caught the subtle hand signal Roderick made. 2 fingers pressed briefly against his chest. They had established a series of such signs during their journey, a private language that would allow them to communicate under the eyes of potential enemies. This one meant, be watchful. Trust no one but me. The chambers assigned to her were luxurious beyond anything she had experienced at Greymont Castle. Rich tapestries covered stone walls, and a fire crackled warmly in an ornate hearth. The bed was enormous, draped with silk curtains and covered in furs that looked fit for royalty. Everything spoke of wealth and power, but also of careful observation. The king wants you comfortable, my lady, said the head servant, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a measuring expression. Is there anything specific you require? Just privacy to rest, Isadora replied, maintaining the meek demeanor expected of an unwanted bride. The journey was taxing. Once alone, she moved to the tall windows and gazed out at the castle grounds. Training yards stretched below, where warriors practiced with deadly precision. She watched them move in perfect coordination, their loyalty to their king evident in every disciplined movement. A soft knock interrupted her observations. Enter. To her surprise, Alpha King Roderick stepped into the chamber, closing the door carefully behind him. In the privacy of her rooms, his formal demeanor shifted, revealing the intensity she had come to recognize. "Are you settled?" he asked, moving to stand beside her at the window. "Your people are watching me," she observed. "I can feel their suspicion. They're watching everyone. It's what keeps us alive in times like these." His voice dropped lower. "There's something you need to know. My spies intercepted a message this morning. Your father isn't the only one plotting against me." Isadora's blood chilled. "What do you mean?" "Lord Blackmere has been building alliances throughout the southern kingdoms. This conspiracy runs deeper than simple territorial ambition." He gestured toward the training yards below. "He's promised them riches beyond imagining if they help him claim the northern territories. How many lords are involved?" "At least 6 that we can confirm." "Possibly more." Roderick's jaw tightened. "They believe that removing me will create a power vacuum they can exploit. They don't understand what they're truly unleashing." Before Isadora could ask what he meant, another knock sounded at her door. This time, the interruption felt urgent. "Your Majesty," came a guard's voice. "Lord Chancellor Aldrich requests your immediate presence in the strategy room. We have visitors." Roderick's expression darkened. "It seems the game begins earlier than expected. Stay here, Isadora. Whatever happens, don't leave these chambers until I return." But curiosity had always been Isadora's weakness. After waiting what felt like hours, she carefully made her way through the castle corridors, keeping to shadows and servant passages she had observed earlier. Her destination was the strategy room, where she hoped to learn more about these mysterious visitors. The voices reached her before she found a vantage point, a small alcove behind a tapestry where she could observe without being seen. "Assure you, Your Majesty, Lord Greymont's commitment is absolute," a familiar voice was saying. Isadora's heart sank as she recognized Sir Marcus Westford, her father's most trusted knight. "The wedding will proceed as planned, and afterward, we'll see how committed your lord truly is," Roderick replied, his tone deceptively mild. "These are dangerous times, Sir Marcus. A man's word means everything, or nothing." "Indeed, Your Majesty. Which is why Lord Greymont sent this as a gesture of good faith." Sir Marcus produced an ornate wooden box. "A wedding gift for your bride with his compliments." Even from her hidden position, Isadora could see Roderick's subtle tension as he accepted the box. His fingers traced its surface with apparent appreciation, but she caught the way his nostrils flared slightly, as if catching a scent that disturbed him. How thoughtful. "I'm sure Lady Isadora will be touched by her father's consideration." The conversation continued for several more minutes, but Isadora's attention remained fixed on that box. Something about it made her skin crawl, though she couldn't identify why. When Sir Marcus finally departed, she waited until the strategy room was empty before emerging from her hiding place. She was almost back to her chambers when disaster struck. A figure stepped from the shadows, tall, lean, with pale eyes that seemed to pierce straight through her. She recognized him immediately from court gossip. Lord Blackmere himself, the man orchestrating her father's treachery. "Lady Isadora," he said smoothly, blocking her path. "How interesting to find you wandering the castle corridors. Shouldn't a proper bride be preparing for her wedding? I was lost," she said quickly, pulling her veil closer around her face. "The castle is so large." "Indeed it is, full of secrets and hidden passages. Perfect for someone who enjoys listening to private conversations." His pale eyes glittered with malice. "You know, there are consequences for those who pry into matters beyond their understanding." Fear shot through Isadora, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I don't know what you mean, my lord." "Don't you?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell wine on his breath. "Your father described you as simple-minded, scarred, and compliant. But I'm beginning to wonder if Edmund Greymont knows his daughter as well as he believes." Before she could respond, the corridor filled with sudden warmth and the scent of pine. Alpha King Roderick materialized from the shadows like a force of nature, his golden eyes burning with barely controlled fury. "Lord Blackmere," he said, his voice carrying lethal promise. "How unexpected to find you in my castle. in corridors where you have no business being. Blackmere straightened, though Isadora caught the flicker of fear in his pale eyes. Your Majesty, I was simply offering congratulations to your bride-to-be. How considerate. Roderick moved to stand beside Isadora, his presence immediately making her feel safer, though I believe Lady Isadora was returning to her chambers. Weren't you, my dear? She nodded, grateful for the escape he was providing. Of course your wedding gift from Lord Greymont proved most interesting, Roderick continued, his tone conversational, but with an edge that made Blackmere tense. Such a thoughtful father, to provide his daughter with her favorite perfume. Isadora's blood turned to ice. Perfume. In a wooden box that had made Roderick's nostrils flare. The same man whose enhanced senses had detected the bandits in the forest long before human ears could hear them. I'm sure she'll treasure it, Blackmere replied carefully. Oh, I'm certain she will, particularly since it contains such exotic ingredients. Roderick's smile was sharp as a blade. Wolfsbane, if I'm not mistaken. An essence of nightshade. Quite a unique blend. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Blackmere's face went pale, but he maintained his composure. I'm sure I wouldn't know, Your Majesty. Lord Greymont selected the gift himself. I'm sure he did. Roderick's hand settled on Isadora's lower back. A gesture that looked protective but felt possessive. Lady Isadora, perhaps you should retire. Tomorrow will be a busy day with preparations. She nodded and fled, but not before catching the look that passed between the two men. It spoke of challenges issued and accepted, of ancient enmities finally brought into the light. Back in her chambers, Isadora paced before the fire, her mind racing. The perfume was clearly intended to poison her, but why? What purpose would her death serve before the wedding? The answer came to her with horrible clarity. They weren't planning to kill Roderick on their wedding night. They were planning to kill her, making it look like she had been murdered by the monster king who rejected his hideous bride. The outrage would justify immediate retaliation, giving Blackmere the excuse he needed to rally the southern lords against the northern territories. Her scarred face would serve their purposes even in death. A soft scratch at her window made her freeze. She moved to the glass and gasped. Perched on the stone ledge outside was an enormous raven, far larger than any natural bird. Its eyes gleamed with intelligence as it tapped the glass with its beak. Hesitantly, she opened the window. The raven hopped inside, then began to shift and blur, its form expanding and changing until a woman stood before her, elderly, with silver-white hair and eyes like winter frost. Lady Isadora, the woman said, her voice carrying the weight of ages. My name is Eldara. I've been waiting a very long time to meet you. Chapter 5. The Price of Truth. Eldara moved through Isadora's chamber with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to navigating between worlds. Her silver-white hair seemed to shimmer with its own light, and those winter frost eyes held depths of knowledge that made Isadora feel like a child staring into an ancient well. You're afraid, the elderly woman observed, settling into a chair as if she'd been invited. Good. Fear keeps you alive when dealing with powers beyond mortal comprehension. Who are you? Isadora whispered, still struggling to process what she'd witnessed. What are you? I am what your people call a hedge witch, though my true nature is far older and more complex. Eldara's gaze fixed on Isadora's veiled face with unsettling intensity. More importantly, I am the woman who cursed you as an infant. The words hit like a physical blow. Isadora sank into the opposite chair, her hands trembling. You're the one who marked me? I am the one who saved your life, Eldara corrected firmly, though I understand the distinction may seem negligible from your perspective. Saved me. You made me hideous. You condemned me to a life of rejection and shame. I concealed your true nature from those who would have killed you in your cradle. The witch's voice carried no apology, only cold certainty. Tell me, child, what do you know of your birth parents? Isadora frowned, thrown by the question. Nothing. Lord Greymont and Lady Vivian are my parents. Lord Greymont found you as an infant, abandoned in the forest. But you weren't abandoned, you were hidden, placed there by a mother who knew that powerful enemies were hunting her bloodline. The chamber seemed to spin around Isadora. What bloodline? You are the last direct descendant of Luna Sylvana, the first witch wolf, a being of immense power who could bridge the gap between the magical and mundane worlds. Eldara leaned forward, her frost eyes burning with intensity. Your true heritage would have made you a target from the moment of birth. The scars I gave you weren't disfigurement. They were camouflage. Witch wolf? The words felt foreign on her tongue. That's impossible. I can't even shift into animal form, because the curse that hides your appearance also suppresses your abilities. It was necessary to keep you safe until you reached maturity and found your destined mate. Eldara's gaze sharpened, which, judging by the mark of claiming I sense on your aura, has finally occurred. Heat flooded Isadora's cheeks as she remembered Roderick's gentle touch. The way his presence made her feel complete. He hasn't claimed me. We're not even truly betrothed yet. The soul recognizes what the mind refuses to accept. You found each other, as was foretold, but now comes the true test. Before Isadora could ask what she meant, urgent knocking echoed through the chamber. "Lady Isadora," a guard's voice called. "His Majesty requires your immediate presence in the Great Hall." Eldara rose smoothly, her form already beginning to blur at the edges. "Remember this, child. When the moment comes to choose between safety and truth, choose truth. Your scars were never your weakness. They were your strength in disguise." The witch dissolved into shadow and moonlight, leaving Isadora alone with questions that threatened to overwhelm her mind. She had no time to process the revelations, however, as the knocking grew more insistent. The great hall buzzed with tension when she arrived. Lords and nobles filled the space, their conversations dying as she entered. At the high table, Alpha King Roderick sat rigidly upright, his golden eyes scanning the crowd like a predator assessing threats. Beside him stood Lord Blackmere, his pale face wearing an expression of false concern. "Ah, Lady Isadora," Roderick called, his voice carrying across the hall. "Perfect timing. Lord Blackmere has brought disturbing news." She approached the high table, keeping her veil firmly in place despite the weight of dozens of stares. "Your Majesty, it seems," Blackmere said smoothly, "that there have been reports of supernatural activities in the Southern Territories. Cattle found drained of blood, strange lights in the forest, witnesses speaking of creatures that shift between human and animal form." A chill ran down Isadora's spine. She could feel Roderick's tension, though his expression remained neutral. "How unfortunate," the Alpha King replied. "Such superstitious nonsense can be quite destabilizing for the common folk." "Indeed? Which is why the Southern Lords have requested immediate action." Blackmere's pale eyes glittered with malice. They believe these incidents might be connected to unnatural influences from the north. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Isadora understood immediately. This was Blackmere's opening move, laying the groundwork to brand Roderick as something inhuman and therefore unfit to rule. Unnatural influences, Roderick repeated slowly. How interesting. And what form would such influences take? Shapeshifters, Blackmere said boldly. Creatures of dark magic masquerading as human beings. The ancient texts speak of them. Wolves who walk upright, beings who corrupt everything they touch. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Some nobles looked skeptical, but others nodded agreement. The seeds of fear and suspicion were taking root exactly as Blackmere intended. "And what?" Roderick asked with deadly calm. "Would the Southern Lords have me do about these alleged creatures? Submit to testing, of course. Prove to all assembled that you are purely human, untainted by supernatural corruption." Blackmere produced an ornate silver dagger from his robes. "This blade has been blessed by holy men and treated with sacred oils. A touch to the skin would cause no harm to a mortal man, but would burn any creature of darkness." Isadora's breath caught. She could see the trap closing around Roderick. Refuse the test, and appear guilty. Accept it, and reveal his true nature to enemies, who would use that knowledge to destroy him. But before anyone could respond, something extraordinary happened. The silver dagger in Blackmere's hand began to glow. Not with holy light, but with a cold, poisonous radiance that made several nobles step back in alarm. The metal grew so bright it was painful to look at, and thin wisps of acrid smoke began rising from its surface. "Fascinating," came a new voice from the hall's entrance. Eldara stepped into the light, no longer concealed by shadow magic. Her appearance sent another wave of murmurs through the crowd. A blade blessed by holy men, you say. Yet it reacts most violently to my presence. How curious. Blackmere's face went ash pale. Who dares interrupt these proceedings? I am Eldara of the Old Ways, and I have come to speak truth to this assembly. The witch's voice carried power that made the very stones of the castle seem to resonate. You speak of supernatural corruption, Lord Blackmere, yet the greatest corruption I sense comes from that blade you wield so boldly. This is nonsense, Blackmere snarled, but his hand shook as he held the still glowing dagger. The blade reacts to evil presence. The blade reacts to the poison that coats its edge, Eldara interrupted. A poison specifically designed to kill those with supernatural heritage. How convenient that you would use such a weapon in your test of purity. Gasps echoed through the hall. Lord Blackmere was exposed, his trap revealed for what it truly was. An assassination attempt disguised as religious ceremony. Seize him, Roderick commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. But Blackmere wasn't finished. As guards moved toward him, he lunged not at the Alpha King, but at Isadora. The poisoned blade swept toward her throat in a desperate attempt to salvage his plan through different means. Isadora heard herself scream. Not in fear, but in fury. Something deep within her chest cracked open like an eggshell, releasing power that had been contained for 22 years. Light exploded from her hands, brilliant as sunlight and warm as summer rain. The light struck Blackmere's dagger and shattered it like glass. The man himself was thrown backward with tremendous force, crashing into the stone wall with bone-crushing impact. In the sudden silence that followed, Isadora stared at her hands in wonder and terror. They still glowed with residual power, and she could feel something wild and magnificent stirring within her soul. Remarkable, Eldara said approvingly. The curse breaks at last. The power surging through Isadora's body was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. She could feel her scars beginning to burn, not with pain, but with transformative heat. The marks that had defined her entire life were changing, shifting, preparing to reveal what had been hidden beneath. No, she whispered, suddenly understanding the price of this revelation. Not here, not like this, but it was too late. The magic that had been suppressed for over 2 decades would not be contained again. Her veil fell away as the transformation began, and she heard gasps of shock from the assembled nobles. The scarred, hideous bride they had dismissed was becoming something else entirely, something beautiful and terrible and utterly beyond their comprehension. And in that moment of revelation, Isadora realized that her true trials were only beginning. Chapter 6. The Wolf's Fury. The transformation was unlike anything the Great Hall had ever witnessed. Isadora stood at its center as golden light poured from her skin, her scars glowing like molten metal before cracking and falling away like discarded shells. Where twisted flesh had marred her features, smooth skin emerged. But it was her eyes that truly captured the assembly's attention. They blazed with inner fire, reflecting depths of power that made even the bravest warriors take involuntary steps backward. Alpha King Roderick rose from his throne, his own transformation beginning in response to his mate's awakening. His human facade rippled like water, revealing glimpses of the massive wolf that dwelled within. His golden eyes burned brighter, and the very air around him crackled with dominance that made every person in the hall fight the urge to prostrate themselves. "Seize the witch!" Lord Blackmere screamed from where he had fallen, blood streaming from his nose and mouth. "She's corrupted the king's bride. This is dark magic." But his remaining allies hesitated, frozen by the display of power before them. The woman they had dismissed as a scarred nobody was radiating energy that made their bones ache and their wolves whimper in submission. This was no mere hedge witch's trickery. This was something primal and ancient awakening after long slumber. "Stand down," Roderick commanded, his voice carrying supernatural authority that brooked no disobedience. "Anyone who moves against my mate will answer to me personally." Isadora felt the truth of those words resonate through her soul. Mate. Not bride, not political alliance, but the deepest bond their kind could forge. The realization should have terrified her, but instead it felt like coming home. "My lord," stammered Lord Aldrich the Chancellor, "what is happening? What has become of Lady Isadora?" Lady Isadora is becoming exactly what she was always meant to be, Eldara interjected, moving to stand protectively near the transforming woman, the last of the witch-wolf bloodline, awakening to her true heritage. The golden light surrounding Isadora began to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. She could feel her body changing on a cellular level. Not just the healing of her scars, but the unlocking of abilities that had been sealed away. Her senses sharpened until she could hear individual heartbeats throughout the hall, smell the fear and confusion that permeated the air. "This is abomination," Blackmere snarled, struggling to his feet despite his injuries. "The Southern Lords will never accept a demon as their queen." "The Southern Lords," Roderick replied with lethal calm, "will accept whoever I choose to place beside me, or they will find themselves in need of new lords." But Blackmere wasn't finished. With desperate fury, he reached into his robes and withdrew a second blade, this one glowing with sickly green light that made the air itself seem to recoil. "If I cannot have your kingdom through alliance," he declared, "then I'll take it through conquest. This blade carries the essence of pure silver, blessed by dark powers. It will kill even an alpha." He lunged toward Roderick with inhuman speed, the cursed weapon aimed at the king's heart. But he had underestimated the bond between true mates. Isadora moved faster than thought itself, golden light streaming behind her like wings. She intercepted Blackmere's strike with her bare hands, catching the blade between her palms. The corrupted silver should have burned through her flesh instantly. Instead, it began to dissolve. "Impossible!" Blackmere gasped, staring in horror as his weapon crumbled to dust between her fingers. "Not impossible," Isadora said, her voice carrying new harmonics of power. "Just beyond your limited understanding." The last of the golden light faded, revealing the truth of her transformation. The scars were gone completely, replaced by skin that seemed to glow with inner radiance. Her features, freed from disfigurement, showed the aristocratic beauty of her true bloodline. But it was the silver markings that now adorned her forehead, forming a perfect crescent moon, that truly marked her as something beyond mortal comprehension. "Behold," Eldara announced to the stunned assembly, "Luna Sylvana reborn. The witch-wolf awakens to claim her destiny." "Luna Sylvana died centuries ago," protested one of the nobles. "Luna Sylvana transcended mortality centuries ago," the hedge witch corrected. "Her bloodline continued, hidden and protected, waiting for the time when the world would need her power again. That time has arrived." Blackmere, now weaponless and facing certain defeat, made one last desperate gambit. From his belt, he drew a small horn and blew a sharp, penetrating note. The sound echoed strangely through the hall, carrying further than should have been possible. "What have you done?" Roderick demanded, his wolf rising closer to the surface. Blackmere's battered face split in a triumphant grin. "I've summoned my true allies. The Southern Lords were merely distractions. My real army has been waiting in your forests, Alpha King. Creatures that will make your precious mate's power seem like a candle before the sun." As if summoned by his words, howls began echoing from the castle grounds. But these were wrong, twisted sounds that made every true wolf in the hall bristle with instinctive revulsion. "Shadow wolves," Eldara breathed, her face going pale. "He's allied himself with the corrupted ones." "What are shadow wolves?" Isadora asked, though part of her already knew the answer would be terrible. "Wolves that sold their souls to dark powers in exchange for supernatural strength. They're faster, stronger, and utterly without conscience. They exist only to kill and corrupt." Roderick's own transformation was accelerating, his human form rippling as his wolf fought for dominance. "They're also supposedly extinct." "Obviously not," Blackmere laughed, backing toward a window as more howls filled the night air. "I found the last pack in the deep caves beneath Shadowmere Mountain. They were quite eager to serve, once I promised them fresh souls to feast upon." The howling grew louder, accompanied now by the sound of fighting from the courtyards below. Castle guards were shouting orders, steel rang against claw, and underneath it all was the sound of something wrong making its way closer. "How many?" Roderick demanded. "Enough," Blackmere replied. "More than enough to tear this castle apart stone by stone. And when they're finished with you, they'll spread across the kingdom like a plague, corrupting everything they touch." "Not if I stop them first," Isadora said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. The power flowing through her veins sang with purpose, demanding to be used. You? Blackmere laughed harshly. You're one woman, barely awakened to your abilities. I've brought an army of darkness. Then it's fortunate, came a new voice from the hall's entrance, that she doesn't fight alone. Lord Edmund Greymont strode into the chamber, but this was not the man Isadora remembered as her adopted father. This figure moved with predatory grace, his eyes burning with inner fire, his presence radiating alpha dominance that rivaled even Roderick's. Father? Isadora whispered in shock. Not your father, he replied, his voice carrying new harmonics of power, but the man who has protected you since birth, waiting for this moment, his gaze fixed on Blackmere with lethal intensity. Did you truly believe you could threaten my daughter and live? Edmund? Blackmere's confidence wavered. But you agreed to this plan. You wanted the northern territories divided. I wanted you to reveal your true nature and your allies, Edmund corrected. I've been hunting shadow wolves for decades, following rumors and whispers. You've finally led me to their nest. The sound of battle was growing closer. Through the tall windows, they could see dark shapes moving across the castle grounds. Creatures that ran on 4 legs, but moved with terrible, unnatural speed. 3 alphas, Eldara observed with satisfaction. The girl could not have asked for better protection. 3? Isadora looked between Roderick and Edmund in confusion. You, child, the hedge witch said gently. Your awakening has revealed your true nature. You carry alpha blood from both sides of your heritage, wolf and witch. You are not merely Luna Sylvana reborn. You are something new entirely. The revelation hit Isadora like lightning, but there was no time to process it. The great hall's doors exploded inward, torn from their hinges by creatures that should not exist. Shadow wolves poured into the chamber, massive beasts with eyes like burning coals and fur that seemed to absorb light itself. Their very presence made the air cold, and the scent of corruption rolled off them in waves. Now, Roderick said, his transformation completing as he shifted into his true form, a wolf the size of a small horse, his golden coat blazing with inner fire. Now we show them what real power looks like. Edmund's shift was equally impressive, revealing a silver-gray wolf whose presence commanded absolute authority. But it was Isadora who truly stunned the assembly. Her transformation was unlike anything they had ever witnessed. Instead of the typical wolf form, she became something that bridged the gap between human and beast, bipedal but clearly lupine, her hands elongated into claws while retaining their dexterity, her face transformed but still recognizably hers. Silver light danced along her limbs, and her eyes burned with the combined power of moon and magic. She was magnificent. She was terrifying. She was exactly what the world needed to face the darkness that had been unleashed. The first shadow wolf that rushed her found itself facing not just an alpha, but a force of nature, reborn. Chapter 7. The Union of Light. The battle that erupted in the great hall of Castle Ironhold would be remembered in legend for centuries to come. Shadow wolves crashed against the combined might of 3 alphas like a dark tide meeting an immovable shore, and the very stones seemed to scream as supernatural forces collided. Isadora moved through the chaos with deadly grace, her hybrid form allowing her to strike with both wolf savagery and human precision. Silver light trailed from her claws as she tore through shadow wolf after shadow wolf, their corrupted essence dissolving at her touch. Each enemy that fell made her stronger, as if their defeat fed the ancient power flowing through her veins. Beside her, Roderick fought with the terrible efficiency of a born predator. His massive golden wolf form was a blur of fang and claw, his alpha dominance forcing even the shadow wolves to hesitate before attacking. But it was clear that numbers would eventually tell. More corrupted beasts poured through the shattered doors with each passing moment. "There are too many!" Edmund called out, his silver-gray form holding the left flank against a wave of attackers. "They keep coming, because their master still lives," Eldara shouted from where she stood, weaving protective spells around the terrified nobles. "Kill Blackmere, and the pack bond will shatter." But Lord Blackmere had retreated to the far end of the hall, protected by a circle of the largest shadow wolves. He stood with arms raised, chanting in a language that predated human civilization. With each word, the air grew colder and the shadows deeper. "He's opening a permanent rift," the Hedge Witch warned. "If he completes that ritual, the Shadow Realm will spill into our world permanently." Isadora felt something shift within her. Not just power, but understanding. The silver markings on her forehead began to burn with inner fire as inherited memories flooded her consciousness. She saw Luna Sylvana facing a similar threat centuries ago, witnessed the original Witchwolf sacrifice to seal away the darkness. "I know what to do," she said, her voice carrying across the battlefield despite the chaos. "But I need time." Roderick's golden eyes found hers across the melee, and in that instant, perfect understanding passed between them. Without words, they had communicated everything that mattered. Trust, love, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for each other. The Alpha King's howl shook the very foundations of the castle as he threw himself into the Shadow Wolves with renewed fury. Edmund joined him, and together they carved a path through the corrupted pack toward Blackmir's position. Meanwhile, Isadora closed her eyes and reached deep within herself, seeking the wellspring of power that had been locked away for so long. She found it blazing like a star in the darkness of her soul, not just witch magic or wolf strength, but something that transcended both. The power of the bond itself. Light began to emanate from her hybrid form, growing brighter with each passing second. The shadow wolves closest to her recoiled with howls of pain, their corrupted nature unable to withstand such pure radiance. "Impossible!" Blackmir screamed, his ritual faltering as he stared at the growing luminescence. "You're just one woman. You cannot stand against the collective darkness." "She's not alone," came a new voice from the hall's entrance. Isadora's eyes snapped open to see figures in white robes flowing into the chamber. The Order of the Silver Moon, warrior priests who had not been seen in the kingdom for over a century. At their head walked a tall man whose face bore the weathered marks of countless battles. "Brother Marcus," Eldara breathed in recognition. "You received my message." "We felt the awakening across half the continent," the warrior priest replied, his blessed sword already singing as it cut through Shadow Wolf flesh. "The last daughter of Luna Sylvana calls, and we answer." The arrival of the Order shifted the battle's momentum decisively. Their blessed weapons carved through the corrupted wolves like sunlight through fog, while their presence seemed to strengthen Isadora's own radiance. But Blackmir was not finished. With a desperate snarl, he abandoned his ritual and drew forth a weapon that made everyone in the hall recoil, a blade forged from crystallized shadow, its very existence an affront to the natural order. "If I cannot rule this kingdom," he declared, raising the abomination above his head, "then I will see it burn. This blade will kill even an alpha, even a witch-wolf hybrid." He lunged toward Isadora with supernatural speed, the shadow blade aimed at her heart, but he had made a crucial error in his desperation. He had forgotten about her true mate. Roderick intercepted the strike, his golden form slamming into Blackmir with bone-crushing force. The shadow blade pierced his side, and the Alpha King's howl of pain echoed through the hall like a funeral dirge. "No!" Isadora's scream contained power that shattered every piece of glass in the chamber. Time seemed to slow as she reached for Roderick, her hands finding the terrible wound in his side. The shadow blade had done more than cut flesh. It was corrupting everything it touched, spreading darkness through his very essence. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his golden eyes already dimming. "I couldn't let him hurt you." "Don't you dare," she replied fiercely, pouring healing light into the wound. "Don't you dare leave me now, not when we've just found each other." But the corruption was spreading faster than she could cleanse it. The shadow blade had been designed specifically to kill alphas, and its poison was beyond the reach of ordinary healing magic. "There is a way," Eldara said softly, appearing beside them. "But the price is high." "What price?" Isadora demanded. "The mating bond must be completed while he still lives. Soul joined to soul. Life force shared between you. It will save him, but it will also mean that his fate becomes yours. If the corruption cannot be cleansed, you will both die." "Then we die together," Isadora said without hesitation. Roderick's eyes widened. "You can't. The risk is mine to take." She cupped his face in her hands, silver light beginning to dance between her fingers. "I love you, Roderick Ironhold. I choose you, Now and forever. Their lips met as the mating bond ignited, and the great hall filled with radiance that made the sun itself seem dim by comparison. The bond that formed between them was visible to every eye present, silver and gold light intertwining, creating something that was neither witch magic nor wolf power, but a fusion of both that transcended either alone. The combined light struck the shadow corruption like a sword, burning it away from Roderick's body with purifying fire. But more than that, it spread outward, touching every shadow wolf in the hall and beyond. The corrupted beasts howled in agony as their stolen darkness was torn away, leaving them either destroyed or restored to their original forms. Lord Blackmere screamed as the wave of purification reached him, his alliance with shadow powers turning against him. The darkness he had embraced consumed him from within, and his form crumbled to ash that was immediately scattered by winds that smelled of spring rain and new beginnings. When the light finally faded, the great hall was transformed. Where shadow wolves had snarled and corrupted magic had tainted the air, now there was only peace. Several ordinary wolves, the redeemed remnants of Blackmere's pack, lay unconscious but breathing, their natural forms restored. "It is done," Brother Marcus announced, his weathered face showing something that might have been wonder. "The shadow realm is sealed, the corruption cleansed. The witch wolf has fulfilled her destiny." But Isadora barely heard him. Her attention was focused entirely on Roderick, who was sitting up slowly, his wounds completely healed, and his golden eyes bright with renewed life. "How do you feel?" she asked, hardly daring to hope. "Like I've been missing half my soul my entire life," he replied, pulling her close. "And like I've finally found it again." Their second kiss was gentler than the first, but no less powerful. Around them, the assembled nobles and warriors began to kneel, not in submission, but in recognition of something unprecedented. They were witnessing the birth of a new kind of royal partnership, one that would reshape the very foundations of their world. "All hail the Alpha King and Queen," Brother Marcus proclaimed, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "May their reign bring light to dark places and peace to troubled lands." The responding cheer shook the castle to its foundations, and Isadora realized that her journey was complete. She was no longer the scarred, rejected daughter of Lord Greymont. She was no longer hiding from her destiny behind veils and shadows. She was exactly who she was meant to be. Edmund approached them, now in human form, and wearing an expression of paternal pride. "You have exceeded every hope I dared nurture," he told Isadora. "Your true parents would be proud beyond measure." "You are my true father," she replied, meaning every word. "Blood doesn't make family. Love does." As dawn broke over Castle Ironhold, painting the sky in shades of gold and silver that seemed to echo the bond between the royal couple, Isadora stood beside her mate and looked out over a kingdom that had been saved not through conquest or political maneuvering, but through the simple power of choosing love over fear. The scarred bride had become a queen. The cursed child had become a savior. And the lonely girl who had once hidden behind veils had finally stepped into the light. Their reign was just beginning. Chapter 8. Seeds of Renewal. The months that followed the battle for Castle Ironhold were unlike any other in the history of Aldermore and the Northern Territories. Spring pushed its way through the last shreds of winter, painting the landscape in lush emerald and gold. Where once fear and suspicion shadowed the hearts of the people, now hope bloomed, tender, uncertain, but steadfast. Isadora, no longer overshadowed by veils and curses, rose each morning with the sunrise, often found walking the castle gardens before the world stirred. Light clung to her wherever she went, a vestige of the radiance unleashed in battle. She had become legend and living proof all at once, a queen whose scars had turned to silvered marks of power, and whose mere presence calmed the wildest beast and softened the hardest heart. Roderick, taller and stronger than any man, was rarely seen apart from his queen. Their bond was not one of outward displays or grand pronouncements, but a silent unity that radiated through all they did. He still presided over council meetings and warrior drills, his presence commanding, but now every decree carried an undercurrent of compassion and reason. He listened not just as king, but as a man who had learned, through fire and sacrifice, to trust the wisdom of another at his side. The unification of Aldermore and the Northern Territories became the central matter of the new reign. Roderick and Isadora traveled together from bustling market towns to wind-swept hamlets, greeting their people not as distant monarchs, but as flesh-and-blood guardians of peace. In every village, Isadora knelt down to meet children at eye level, sharing gentle words, healing with a luminous touch, and teaching that kindness outweighed appearances or birth. Ceremonies marked their journey, some old as the stones, with runes traced in chalk and sage burnt till dusk, others new, with themes of unity and shared destiny. The traditions of wolves and humans blended, and with each ritual, distrust dissolved a little more. One spring evening, as the kingdom gathered in the great courtyard, Isadora and Roderick slipped away from the festivities to visit the old healer's school, now repurposed as a sanctuary for those orphaned by war and sickness. There, Isadora sat among a cluster of children, scars still lining their faces and arms, not marks of shame, but badges of survival. "Will I ever be healed like you, my lady?" a small girl asked, her cheeks streaked with soot and tears. Isadora smiled, touching her own crescent-marked brow. "You already are. Scars can't hide your bravery or your heart." Her silvery power glimmered, not erasing the marks, but soothing pain and fear. "These are not curses. They show the world how strong you are." News of this magic spread throughout both realms, not as rumor, but as a promise. People flocked to the castle gates for healing, but Isadora's greatest gift was not in curing wounds. It was in showing others how to face their lives without shame or fear. Roderick watched his queen shape the future with gentle hands. In moments of quiet, he marveled at the unexpected fortune that had come to him. The scarred girl who had once been offered as an insult had become the kingdom's heart. Together, they forged a council with humans, shifters, witches, and wolves, each holding a voice and vote. The laws they crafted protected not only the powerful, but the vulnerable. Children, orphans, outcasts, and even those of Shadow Wolf legacy, now restored and remorseful. 6 months after the battle, a new academy stood at the border of the two lands, built not of cold stone, but of honeyed wood and glass that reflected sunlight at every hour. Children of all heritages, wolf, witch, human, were invited to learn side by side, trained not only in the old ways of magic and mastery, but in history, empathy, and the skills needed for peace. Roderick and Isadora attended the opening with little formality, her hands dusted with chalk from teaching, his sword hung on a wall rather than his belt. One evening, Isadora entered her private study to find a messenger waiting, bearing a letter puckered with unfamiliar wax and sigils. She broke the seal to discover greetings from a neighboring realm, an invitation for a diplomatic visit, and the hope of learning from Ironhold's peace. Roderick entered, recognizably battle-worn even after months of peace, and read the invitation with a slow smile. "It seems our legend travels faster than we do," he mused, looping his arm around her waist. Silver and gold glinted together where their marks touched. "Are you ready to teach the world what you've taught me, Isadora Greymont?" She placed her hand upon his heart. "We'll do it together." As the seasons turned, there came whispers of another change. The kingdom's healers and wise women began to smile knowingly. More than once, Isadora caught Roderick watching her with wonder and worry in his eyes. It was Eldara who, during one of the Queen's evening walks, finally spoke the truth neither had yet said aloud. "The miracle you carry will change everything," the old witch said gently, her frost-colored eyes warm for the first time. "A child born of both worlds, with a gift to unite what was once torn." Isadora's hand went instinctively to her belly, new tenderness blooming through every part of her. "Will it be hard for them? It is always hard to build what others have only dreamed." Eldara's voice was soft, "But with parents like you and the Alpha King, the child shall never walk alone." Some weeks later, as Roderick and Isadora returned to Castle Ironhold from visiting a distant mountain village, a foreign carriage labored up the road. An envoy family stepped out, led by a royal couple whose little girl hid her face behind large curls and a trembling veil. Isadora crouched to greet the child, who at last revealed a birthmark sprawling across half her face. The queen brushed the girl's hair aside, smiling so that her crescent mark caught the light. "You are welcome here. No one will judge you for what you cannot change." Seeing Roderick's nod, and the openness on the faces of those gathered, The child's mother wept as happiness replaced lifelong caution. Word traveled, and Castle Ironhold's court became a sanctuary, not just for diplomats and nobles, but for all who sought a new beginning. Years passed, and the myth of the scarred bride faded into something deeper. Legend, yes, but also memory, woven into daily life. People built homes, forged marriages, learned at the academy, and told their children stories of the queen marked by moonlight who taught them to love their scars, and the king who learned that true strength was made not of stone and steel, but of mercy and faith. One blustery spring morning, as Isadora stood upon the castle's highest parapet, watching children play in the fields below, she pressed a hand to the small growing swell of her belly and felt Roderick's arms come around her. Together, they looked out over a kingdom neither had ever dreamed, a land united not by war, but by shared trials and new hope. Their reign, the reign of the Alpha King and the Witch-Wolf Queen, would be remembered not for the darkness they vanquished, but for the light they nurtured. And in every heart, human, wolf, witch, or otherwise, lived the reminder that scars, whether seen or unseen, were simply the places where the light had managed to break through.